Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Just Say Guay. I'm your host, George Guay. Today I'm joined by Alex Schiffer, who is a beat writer for The Athletic with the Brooklyn Nets. Alex, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, so how have you been this year? I know it's definitely different for you, not traveling, as you mentioned before this episode started, limited capacity at the games. What's it been like?
It's been wild. I mean, every week something different happens to this team. Third game of the season, Spencer Dinwiddie tears his ACL. The Harden trade happens a couple weeks later. Then you see the LaMarcus Aldridge signing, Blake Griffin, LaMarcus Aldridge retirement. Now Kevin Durant's latest injury. Just when you think the big three are gonna, finally be reunited. There's never been a dull day, despite the limitations with the pandemic.
Yeah, for sure, and it's definitely been a crazy month for the Nets. So, what were your expectations coming into the season with this team? At the beginning of the year, we thought it was just going to be Kyrie and KD. KD missing the season before. What were your expectations?
Yeah, I want to see them first, obviously, with Durant tearing his Achilles and that being a tough injury to come back from what he looks like. I think I want to say in the preseason, I pegged them to the expectation it should be to make the conference finals and then kind of see where they go from there. But I mean, the Harden trade obviously changes expectations to championship or bust. So yeah, I mean, I had thought that they could still potentially win the whole thing when the roster, with the opening day roster, as is with Karis LeVert off the bench and Taurean Prince and Jared Allen and those guys. But I mean, now they're still just as dangerous and the expectations are just higher.
Yeah, so the expectations obviously increased when they got Harden. At what point, being around the team a lot and just being at all the games, at what point did the possibility of Harden coming to the Nets was a reality? Because a lot of people thought that, given how he behaved in Houston, that they might not want to send him to the team that he wants to go to. What point did that make you think he'd come to the Nets?
Yeah, I mean, it obviously was hanging over the head of the organization. I mean, this feels like years ago now, but I forget if it was early November or closer to Thanksgiving that stuff really started to pick up steam. And when Drew Holiday got traded to the Bucks, I definitely thought that, all right, you see maybe the Nets' biggest challenger, because no one saw the Sixers doing this year. Getting another big weapon. Maybe this pushes the Nets closer to doing that deal. So I guess early January they're starting to get a lot more legs to this being a possibility. But obviously, going back to November, it was something everybody was very well aware of.
Yeah, for sure. So obviously, if you have a lot of talent on that team, you got to have a good coach to be able to manage it. Has Steve Nash exceeded your expectations as a first-year coach, especially with that type of talent on the team?
It's a good question. He's definitely gotten better over the course of the season. In the beginning of the year, his timeout and rotation management was kind of questionable, and I think he started to get into a groove. And I mean, honestly, you see all the attrition they've had this year with the big three and the rest of the roster. I think it's 31 different starting lineups. 32 might be on Tuesday against the Pelicans. So I think, given going into the season, obviously the expectations were high, and he had a good coaching staff around him, but no one saw them having these many issues and lineup fluctuation. And given that the Nets are second in the East and a game behind the Sixers, given all that he's had to deal with, I actually think he's overexceeded just based on the hand he's been dealt compared to how we thought this was all going to look.
Yeah, so something I've liked about that staff is that, yes, Steve Nash, it's his first year of coaching, but he has someone that he trusts who's coached before. Amari Stoudemire's on the roster. Do you think he's also one of those type of guys that people listen to because, he didn't win a championship, but he definitely made it in the league and was one of an all-star at one point?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's, for my money, one of the 2 or 3 best point guards of the 21st century. I mean, he's definitely way up there. And I think that his usage, even though he doesn't have a ring on his finger, he's a player's coach. He's been in their shoes before. He's been on teams with very high expectations. And I think that he's definitely kind of won the locker room over just based on his style, him being a laid back guy, and again, his ability to kind of be as close to in Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving's shoes as before.
I totally agree. So one thing I got to ask you about that is, I'm amazed at how much Steve Nash can keep the locker room under control. I think on a lot of teams, when Kyrie Irving left the team for a bit of time, we didn't know where he was. And we found out where he was actually, but I think on a lot of teams, I think you'd lose the locker room. I think a lot of players would say this isn't fair. We're putting everything into it, and he's not. But how do you think he was able to, take that in as a coach?
Yeah, I think that he understands a little bit of Kyrie kind of being a bit of a different animal. And again, we knew that we know that he was at a birthday party, but we don't know what else could have been going on there. But I think that he's kind of handled Kyrie about as well as you can. Again, you never know what you're going to get sometimes, but I think that he's understood that some guys need their space. It's funny, this isn't the best comparison, but if you watch The Last Dance, Phil Jackson understood that Dennis Rodman needed to go to Vegas, and it found a way to kind of keep the team together from that, and the rest of the team understood it. And I think it's a similar dynamic, just in that Kyrie might have some stuff come up, and he might need a game off from that. Again, it's his business if it's a personal reason, but kind of finding a way to massage that in the rest of the locker room so that, as you said, it's not an issue and that it works out. I think that he's kind of found a way to kind of, keep everybody happy with that, as unique of a situation as it may be.
Yeah, one thing that surprised me about this team is I think I knew that they would gel at some point, but it seems like that those three, I know they've been on the court different times with each other, but did they gel faster than you thought they would? Because, remember when the Heat formed, it took some time.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think the biggest question kind of hanging over them right now is, are they going to have enough time to gel ahead of the postseason? I definitely think that they have gelled with whatever roster they've been dealt, right? If it's Harden and Kyrie, Harden and Durant and Kyrie, whatever the combinations have been, or if it's just Kyrie, just Durant, just Harden, I think that all of those lineups have found a way to kind of exist and have high success. But the 7-game sample size, I think it's decent. They're 5-2, and that one of those games is you get to take it with an asterisk, right? That weird Durant game against Toronto where he wasn't able to start due to contact tracing, then he was able to play, then he wasn't. So it's really 6.5 games if you want to call it that. So I think the question is going to be, if they win the whole thing, then they had as much time, then they had plenty of time, even though we were all skeptical. If they fall short, I think that's going to be reason number one, is they just didn't have enough time to figure it out amongst the three of them with the rest of the roster and the coaching staff. But, as we've kind of said, they've been making it work so far. So I think they kind of get the benefit of the doubt of finding ways to pull this off in the playoffs. And again, a lot of these guys, Blake Griffin, James Harden, they're here to get a ring. They don't have that. So I think that they kind of understand what the sacrifice is needed for them, given that, they're here for a reason.
Yeah, to me, those are the two biggest threats for the Nets. It's the chemistry and, the health. But
yes.
If it's not that and it's a team, what team do you think is the biggest threat for them? Do you think it's the Lakers or the Clippers, or do you think it's a team in the East?
Man, I honestly go back and forth with this on a weekly basis. I really want to see the Lakers fully healthy with Drummond, LeBron, and Anthony Davis. That gives them so much length and versatility on defense. I think they can be a problem. And Dennis Schroeder was cooking the Nets in the last game they played on April 10th. Him and Kyrie had offsetting ejections, but they had no answer for him at some point. The Bucks, are interesting to me because I feel like with their core with Giannis and Holiday and Middleton, they have more two-way oriented guys than most teams in terms of defense. That their core can guard way better than the Nets can, but also they don't have the track record in the postseason that some of these other teams have. And, the Sixers are fascinating to me. I go back and forth with them too. I like the way they're built. I love the shooting they have around Embiid, and obviously Simmons is a big threat, but you look at the game against the Nets the last time where they almost choked it away against the Nets reserves. It was the Sixers A team against, essentially the Nets C team. So I kind of have my reservations about them too. So, and Clippers remind me of the Bucks a bit where they have to prove it to me. So I don't know how to answer your question, honestly. If Denver comes out of the West, it wouldn't stun me. If Utah were to pull something off, it wouldn't stun me. But, I feel like it's going to come down to who's healthy for the postseason and who kind of finds a way to, navigate the hurdles that we've seen this season throw, whether it's contact tracing, injuries, or, depth or lack thereof. So I honestly change my mind every week. Denver's looked good without Jamal Murray with Michael Porter in there. So they're right now a team I'm kind of keeping an eye on too to come out of the West. So I don't know if I answered your question. I kind of gave you a long sermon for an answer, but that's kind of where my head's at with it, honestly.
Yeah, that's okay. So, like you mentioned, the Lakers, Drummond, Anthony Davis, LeBron, Brooklyn's the super team now. Do you see this era just keep constantly cycling with players forming together? Do you think we could ever get back to those days where, guys like Kobe, Duncan, Dirk, where they played decades with one franchise, or do you think those days are kind of over?
It's an interesting question. I feel like we're kind of going to know the answer in the next 2 years or so, right? I mean, the Nets, I think, are going to kind of stay together for the next year or two, not counting this season. And I mean, Kyrie Irving is a Jersey guy. He grew up rooting for the Nets. I don't really see him going anywhere, and I don't really see Durant going anywhere either. But as you said, I mean, we've been surprised before with all this. And you look at the way the Clippers are built too, with some of these guys on short-term deals like Kawhi. Like, do they stay there, or do they find another place to go? So, I think we're kind of at a crossroads with that, where are we going to see, all right, some of these guys just changed teams once or twice, then they found a home and were there, 5+ years, or is it continuing this trend of every few years, you kind of reshuffle the deck and the stars go elsewhere. So I don't know which way it's going to lean, because I kind of have reasons for either one, but I think we're going to learn in the next year or two kind of what direction that's going for sure. And
yeah, I agree.
Go ahead.
I know. I was just going to say, I agree that I think the hard part about this, obviously Brooklyn and LA, I look at them as the two super teams, but you got teams like Boston, Philly, Milwaukee, and the Clippers, where they have two stars, and there's definitely going to be free agents that think, hey, I'm that missing piece. And it's interesting. I look at the New York Knicks, look what they're doing, and it's really Julius Randle and a bunch of great pieces that are around him. But who knows, now that they're back, who knows if a player would want to go there and form a super team with him.
Yes, I agree. They're going to be an interesting one. The Knicks honestly remind me so much of the Nets from like 2 years ago, right? Where they're this surprise team. People thought the Knicks were going to be a lottery team. Here the Nets were, with Dinwiddie, Joe Harris, D'Angelo Russell, Jared Allen, kind of surprising everyone and sneaking into the playoffs. And I think that's going to be interesting for the Knicks, because, they have a lot of the things that originally attracted Durant and Irving to the Nets, right? I mean, they have a young core of promising players in R.J. Barrett, Mitchell Robinson, et cetera. They have, a guy for, that's established a little more than the rest, and Julius Randle, the way D'Lo was, even though D'Lo, was kind of the sacrifice for this to work. And they have some decent coaching. I kind of wonder the same way you do, is there a guy that kind of sees himself as the missing piece to kind of make them like a top 4 team in the East, with them being a 6 seed right now, and that grows with that core? Or is it, they got to kind of go more homemade and make it work with that group? So I'm kind of curious, like you are, to kind of see if, it's a weak free agent class right now, and kind of see maybe the following summer who that person could be. But I think there's a lot of intrigue right now as to where they could go with this current group for sure on the free agency market.
Yeah, for sure. So my last question is, what do you think the Nets need to improve on before they get to the playoffs, other than health?
Definitely defense. I think the question kind of hanging over them right now, aside from the health, is how good does the defense have to be? Do they have to be elite, or do they have to be good enough? And even though the guys have said, they have to be elite, I mean, you look at I'm not a math wizard, but they're still in the 20s with defensive rating. Talking about them climbing into the teens or outside the top 10 by the end of the regular season with 15 games and change. You're talking about holding teams to unrealistic numbers, right? Like 40 points a game just to get that defensive rating into the number it has to be. So I think the ship has sailed on the can it be elite, and I think it has to be can it be good enough, and then that goes into the definition of what is good enough, right? Does it have to be in the the low 20s or the high teens? Like what's the defense that gets them to where they want to go? And we're going to see that in the playoffs for right in front of us as to what it needs to be. So I just think you look at what they need to do defensively and where they are now. Like what is the gap? Is there a gap? And what goes into closing the gap if there is one?
Yeah, for sure. Makes sense. And personally, I'm from Boston. I don't want to see the Nets in the second round. I'd rather see Philly.
As the reporter, I would love to see the Nets and Celtics in the second round, because I would love to see the Garden going after Kyrie and how he responds to that.
Yes, that's true.
I think even Boston fans would have some fun with that and would want that matchup in that sense, even if the Nets do have more firepower.
So I've kept track of it. He hasn't actually played in front of the Boston fans since he's left. He's avoided it.
Correct.
He didn't show up the first 2 times, and this past one there was no fans, so he kind of owes us to play.
I agree. All eyes would be on that, and I'd be extremely curious to kind of see what the scene is. I remember last November when the Nets played there for the first time, there were photos outside the Garden taped on the buildings of Courage the Cowardly Lion from the Wizard of Oz with Kyrie's face photoshopped into him. You know,
are you talking about the coward posters?
Yes.
I know the people who did that.
Really?
On a personal level, yeah. I know those people.
You might need to connect me with them for a story then. But yeah, I mean, so you know them, like you're telling me they wouldn't crack the printer open again if the playoffs happened? If that happened in the playoffs?
I think if he came back, I think he'd get extremely booed, but I think it wouldn't be as bad as it should be because it's been so much time since he left. It's not like the first time he came in where it's 3 months after he left and he's on his new team. But I think if he came back, I think he would get booed a lot. But I don't know. I don't think he'd really care.
I agree with all that. Again, you're the Boston sports fan, but you know, I just think about, you know, you saying there being a lot of time in between, like outside of Roger Clemens, I can't really think of a villain in the eyes of Boston sports.
Johnny Damon.
That's a good one. There
was a lot of he was the one who embodied the whole Red Sox thing. They just beat the Yankees. He went there, you know, cut the beard down and just didn't look like Johnny Damon anymore. And, you know, especially how heated the rivalry was at the time. But yeah, Boston really hasn't had someone come back that was a villain.
Yeah, and that would have been 2005, 2006, 2000, yeah, something like that. So I mean, it's been a good 15 years since they had someone of that caliber, which is why the time element is what you said is interesting. Like it's been a while since there's been a character of that I'm trying to villainy, discontent, you know, that hatred, I guess, for even if it might not be as that bad. So that's why the writer in me really wants to see that matchup.
Yeah, for sure. I'm looking forward to it too. And Alex, thanks for coming on my show, and we'll stay in touch, man.
Thank you. You too.